The cameras had barely started rolling when Rasheeda took a deep breath, her voice trembling just enough to make viewers lean in closer. She didn't come here to smile, to talk about business ventures, or to promote a new project. No, this was different. This was raw. This was Rasheeda, stripped down, ready to tell the world about the vacation that nearly shattered everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and family. At first glance, a vacation sounds like the picture-perfect escape. Sun-soaked beaches, laughter echoing by the pool, cocktails in hand, and picture-worthy moments for Instagram. But behind the filtered snapshots, Rasheeda says there was another story. One so explosive it left her questioning her marriage, her friendships, and even her place within her own family. In her own words, "It wasn't paradise, it was the trip that broke me." Fans are already stunned, because for years Rasheeda has built the image of a woman in control. A survivor who turned public heartbreak into power. But this time, the cracks were too big to cover up. Imagine an argument so heated the entire hotel lobby froze. Imagine whispered accusations exchanged in hushed tones late at night, when the cameras were off but the wounds were still raw. Imagine family members picking sides, friendships dissolving in real time, and a betrayal so deep Rasheeda admits she still hasn't fully healed. The vacation wasn't supposed to go that way. It was planned as a reunion, a chance to reconnect and breathe after years of non-stop chaos. Instead, it became a battlefield where secrets spilled out like grenades, shocking not only the people involved but also fans who thought they knew the truth about Rasheeda's life. She admits she considered walking away from everything: her marriage, her career, even her public persona. In her voice, you can hear both the anger and the hurt as she promises, "I'm about to tell you exactly what went down, because people need to know the truth." And just like that, the stage is set. The vacation that was meant to heal instead turned into the breaking point, and tonight, Rasheeda is ready to take us there. The moment Rasheeda started recounting what really happened, her eyes darkened with that mix of hurt and defiance fans know all too well. And it was clear this wasn't some playful reality TV stunt or a surface-level misunderstanding. This was a wound carved deep, one that carried the weight of years of suppressed emotions. She said the vacation had been sold to her as a reset button, a chance to escape Atlanta drama, put aside grudges, and just breathe as a family. But from the moment the plane touched down, it felt like something was off. The energy was tense. People were smiling on the outside, but the silences in between the smiles told another story. And Rasheeda admitted she felt like she had stepped into a trap disguised as paradise. "I didn't even realize how many grudges people were still holding," she whispered, her voice tightening as if she was reliving the sting of those first few days. The dinners that were supposed to be about laughter turned into battlefields of shade, where every word had an edge and every toast carried a hidden jab. Even the staff at the resort picked up on it, throwing each other knowing looks as voices rose louder than the ocean waves outside. She recalled one particular night when Kirk pulled her aside during a beachfront party, his face illuminated by the tiki torches, and instead of comforting her, he accused her of stirring the pot, of being the reason things were so tense. Rasheeda's reaction was instant. Her eyes narrowed, her hands clenched, and she fired back that she was tired of always being blamed for the chaos around them. "Do you know how it feels?" she said, her voice shaking in the interview. "To be called the problem in a room full of people who are actually coming for you." The argument didn't stay private for long. Within minutes, cousins and friends were leaning in, eavesdropping, and before she knew it, half the family was pulled into a shouting match on the sand while tourists gawked at the spectacle. The whole vacation was supposed to be a reset, but instead it became the very stage where years of betrayal, resentment, and mistrust exploded in front of everyone. What cut her the deepest was realizing just how divided the room, the beach really was. People she thought would have her back stayed silent or even sided with Kirk, while others took the opportunity to drag old receipts out into the open. It was like people had been waiting for that moment, waiting to unload everything they never said in Atlanta, she confessed, her voice laced with bitterness. One friend even accused Rasheeda of faking her smiles for the cameras, of living a double life where she preached strength but secretly let her marriage fall apart behind closed doors. The words stung not because they were true, but because they were spoken in front of everyone, designed to humiliate her and strip her power away. Fans would have been stunned to see it. The woman who always held her head high, suddenly backed into a corner with nowhere to hide. Rasheeda admitted there were nights she locked herself in her room, staring at the ceiling while the sounds of laughter and music floated up from the pool below. "It felt like I was trapped in the middle of a war zone. Except I couldn't walk away," she said softly, and for once, her strength cracked. She even described calling a close friend back home in tears, whispering that she wanted to catch the first flight back. But pride and the fear of giving people more ammunition kept her glued to that resort. Instead, she endured, showing up every morning with sunglasses to hide the redness in her eyes and a forced smile to cover the ache in her chest. But every day, the drama grew sharper, the whispers got louder, the alliances clearer, and the betrayals cut deeper. And perhaps the most shocking twist came midweek, when someone Rasheeda never expected turned against her. It happened during a family dinner inside the resort's private dining hall. Plates of seafood sat untouched as the air grew thick with tension. One cousin, who Rasheeda had always treated like a sister, slammed her wineglass down and accused her of being fake loyal, of pretending to put family first while secretly looking out only for herself. The room fell into stunned silence, all eyes darting between the two women, and Rasheeda felt her blood boil. She wanted to shout back, to remind everyone of the countless times she had sacrificed for the very people now tearing her apart. But before she could speak, Kirk muttered under his breath, "Well, she's not entirely wrong." That was the moment Rasheeda said she felt something inside her snap. To hear him side with her, in front of everybody. Knowing everything we'd been through, I swear my hands started shaking so bad I had to grip the table just to keep from falling apart. The tension spilled over, voices rising until the manager rushed in to beg the group to lower their tone. But the damage was already done. Rumors started swirling, whispered by onlookers who posted vague hints online. Fans piecing together that something explosive had happened during the trip. I couldn't even walk to breakfast without hearing the whispers, Rasheeda revealed. Like I was some character in a play everyone had paid to watch crumble. The worst part, she admitted, wasn't the arguments, it was the loneliness. The sense that the people she trusted most were watching her unravel and enjoying the spectacle. That realization hit hardest one night when she overheard Kirk laughing with the same cousin who had called her fake. Their voices muffled but their betrayal clear as glass. She sat on the balcony alone, tears streaming down her face, as the sound of waves clashed with the sound of their laughter, and she said to herself, "This is the vacation that broke me." She wasn't exaggerating. Every day chipped at her armor. Every side-eyed glance or whispered conversation reminded her that she was no longer in control. And for a woman who had built her life on strength, resilience, and control, that loss felt unbearable. Still, she carried on, dragging herself to every planned activity, plastering on a smile for photos, and pretending the sun on her skin was enough to burn away the ache in her chest. But as she told the story, her voice cracked when she admitted that deep down, she knew she was breaking. It wasn't the beach, or the drinks, or the laughter, she explained. It was the betrayal, the constant feeling that no matter what I said or did, I was always going to be the villain in somebody else's story. And that, she revealed, was only the beginning of what went down during the trip, because the real explosion came later. When the vacation turned into a showdown no one saw coming. The next morning, after that heated dinner, the air at the resort was thick with tension that you could almost taste, like salt in the breeze. Rasheeda described walking downstairs in her sundress, pretending to check her phone, but she could feel the weight of every eye on her. Family members scattered around the lobby with coffee cups in hand, whispering, cutting their glances toward her like knives. She tried to brush it off, tried to convince herself she was imagining it, but the truth was clear. Alliances had already been drawn overnight, and she was no longer the respected matriarch or the glue of the group. She had become the target. I could hear them pause when I walked by, like I was the enemy, and I thought, how did we even get here? This was supposed to be healing, not war, she recalled, her voice carrying both disbelief and sorrow. It didn't take long for the whispers to erupt into something much more dangerous. That afternoon, during what was meant to be a fun boat excursion, things spun completely out of control. The group had boarded a private yacht, the kind meant for laughter, sunbathing, and champagne toasts. But by the time the boat pulled away from the dock, the tension was so heavy that even the crew stayed quiet. Rasheeda said she tried to keep her distance, lounging at the back deck with oversized sunglasses shielding her eyes. But when Kirk sat himself down in the middle of the group and started joking with the very cousin who had humiliated her the night before, something inside her ignited. "I felt invisible in my own marriage," she admitted, her words laced with bitterness. "He knew how much I was hurting, and instead of supporting me, he entertained the very people who were tearing me apart." The breaking point came when another relative, clearly fueled by the drama, threw out a casual comment about Rasheeda being too controlling in her marriage, suggesting that maybe Kirk was happier when she wasn't around. The words hung in the salty air, the kind of comment you can't take back once it's out. Rasheeda's jaw tightened, her eyes locked on Kirk, waiting for him to shut it down. To defend her, to at least acknowledge the disrespect. But instead, he chuckled. That laugh light careless, as though the insult meant nothing, cut deeper than any fight they had ever had. That laugh felt like betrayal, Rasheeda confessed, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. She stood up, her chair scraping against the deck, and in front of everyone she snapped, "You think this is funny? You really think watching me get dragged is a joke?" The boat went silent, except for the waves slapping against the hull, and all eyes were on her. Kirk's response only made things worse. Calm, almost smug, he replied, "Maybe if you stopped acting like you're better than everybody, they wouldn't feel the need to say it." The words hit her like a slap. Gasps filled the air, and even the crew exchanged nervous looks, sensing the explosion that was about to come. Fans would be shocked, she said during the interview, shaking her head. The man who once begged me to stand by him was now tearing me down in front of everybody, on a boat in the middle of the ocean. Her hands shook as she recounted how she shouted back, unleashing years of pent-up anger, accusing him of undermining her, of betraying her not just as a husband but as a partner who should have been her shield. Kirk fired back. Voices rose, and soon, half the family was screaming, defending one side or the other. The chaos got so out of hand that one of the crew members actually begged them to calm down, reminding them they were miles from shore and the boat couldn't turn back. It felt like being trapped in a nightmare, Rasheeda explained. Nowhere to go, nowhere to escape, just me standing there, surrounded by people who wanted to see me break. The boat ride turned into an all-out battleground, with accusations flying left and right. Some family members accused Rasheeda of being fake, of caring more about her public image than the people in the room. Others accused Kirk of being a coward for laughing instead of standing by his wife. At one point, someone even shouted that the marriage was over, that it was only a matter of time before the world saw it crumble. The words sent a chill down Rasheeda's spine. She admitted, "In that moment, I started to believe maybe they were right." When the boat finally docked hours later, the group spilled out onto the pier, still red-faced and seething. Tourists stared, phones whipped out to record the drama, and Rasheeda could already imagine the headlines. Another public implosion. Another scar to add to her marriage's long history. She stormed back to her room, slamming the door shut and collapsing onto the bed, her body trembling from the weight of it all. She said she stared into the mirror and barely recognized her self-puffy eyes, smudged makeup, a woman holding on by a thread. "I kept asking myself, is this really what I deserve? Is this really what my life has become?" Her voice cracked as she admitted she even considered packing her bags that night, disappearing without telling anyone, just leaving the drama behind. But something held her back, maybe pride, maybe fear, or maybe that stubborn voice inside her that refused to let them win. The days that followed only made things worse. Gossip spread like wildfire, not just within the family but online too, as cryptic posts and shady captions started appearing on Instagram. Rasheeda scrolled through her feed and saw the aggressive, the passive-aggressive comments, the laughing emojis that cut deeper than any words. Fans began speculating, deeming her, asking what really happened, and she stayed silent, knowing that one wrong post could fuel the fire even more. She admitted, "I felt like I was suffocating. Everywhere I turned, somebody was laughing at my pain, and the one person who was supposed to protect me was sitting with them." By now, the vacation that was meant to heal had turned into the ultimate betrayal, and Rasheeda could feel herself unraveling with every passing day. But the real twist, the one that made her voice crack with both rage and disbelief during the interview, was what she discovered the night before they were set to fly back home. Walking past the pool after midnight, she caught sight of Kirk sitting with two relatives, drinks in hand, their voices low but their laughter loud enough to echo across the courtyard. She paused in the shadows, just out of sight, and listened. What she heard made her knees buckle. They weren't just laughing about the fights, they were laughing about her. Jokes about her crying, about her being too sensitive, about how she always had to be the center of attention. "It was like watching the people you love morph into strangers right in front of you," she said. "And in that moment, I realized something had broken not just in me, but in the foundation of everything I thought we had." That night, she didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tears soaking her pillow, replaying every argument, every laugh, every betrayal. By morning, she had made up her mind. The Rasheeda who had walked into that vacation would not be the same Rasheeda walking out. But before the plane took off, one final confrontation sent the entire group into chaos. A blowout so fierce that it left scars no vacation could ever heal. And that, Rasheeda admitted, was the moment the vacation became the trip that didn't just test her, it broke her. By the final day of the trip, The resort itself seemed to echo with the weight of everything that had gone wrong. Like the walls were holding secrets no one wanted to say out loud. Rasheeda remembered waking up that morning with swollen eyes and a heavy chest, knowing this was her last chance to either make peace or let the storm consume her, but deep down, she admitted, she already knew there would be no peaceful resolution. It felt like everyone was waiting for that last explosion, she said, her tone low and filled with pain. At breakfast, she walked into the dining hall where the family was gathered, her chin high, but her insides trembling. The chatter died down instantly. All she could hear was the clinking of spoons against coffee cups, the nervous shuffle of chairs, and the silence of people who had said too much but still weren't done. The final blow began with something small always, the way these things happen. One of Kirk's relatives made a sly comment about how Rasheeda had been hiding in her room more than enjoying the trip, suggesting she was acting like a diva instead of trying to mend bonds. Rasheeda shot back instantly, her voice sharp and cutting through the room. Maybe I wouldn't need to hide if half the people here weren't stabbing me in the back every chance they get. That was all it took for the breakfast table to turn into a battlefield. Voices rose, fingers pointed, and suddenly, old wounds that had nothing to do with the trip were being hurled across the table. Someone brought up business deals gone wrong. Someone else accused Rasheeda of holding grudges from years ago. And when Kirk, once again, failed to defend her instead, mumbling that she should just let it go, Rasheeda exploded. You don't get to tell me to let it go when you've been laughing at me with them, she shouted, slamming her hand against the table so hard the silverware rattled. Gasps filled the room. Kirk froze, his jaw tight, but Rasheeda pressed on. I heard you sitting out there by the pool, laughing about me like I'm some joke. Do you have any idea what that did to me? To hear my own husband sit with people who disrespect me and join in like it's funny. Her voice cracked as tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to back down. The room erupted again, half the family trying to intervene, others defending Kirk. And suddenly the vacation's thin layer of civility was completely shattered. Fans would have been shocked to see the rawness of that moment. No cameras, no filters, just Rasheeda breaking in front of everyone who had pushed her to the edge. Relatives shouted, plates clattered, and for a split second it looked like someone was about to flip the entire table. The resort staff rushed in, pleading for calm, but emotions were too high. And then, in the middle of the chaos, Rasheeda stood up, her chair scraping across the tile, and said words that silenced the entire room. This trip didn't just break MIT, showed me who I can never trust again, and if that means walking away from all of you, including you, Kirk, then so be it. The words hung heavy in the air, shocking even her. She had never said something like that out loud, never dared to put into words what she had been feeling all week, but once spoken, there was no taking it back. Kirk's face went pale. He opened his mouth to respond, but for the first time in years, he seemed to realize he had no defense. The family shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some whispering, others staring wide-eyed. Because they knew this wasn't just another argument, it was the kind of statement that could end everything. Rasheeda turned and walked out, her heels echoing down the hallway, her body shaking but her head unbowed. That was the moment I stopped being scared of losing them, she said in the interview, her voice firm, because I realized I had already lost them. Back in her room, she started packing her bags, her hands trembling as she folded clothes into the suitcase. She described how surreal it felt, zipping up her luggage while hearing muffled shouting continue downstairs. It was like I had already left, like my spirit had checked out before the plane even boarded, she recalled. Yet even in that moment of breaking, she couldn't fully shut off her emotions. She thought of the years she had poured into building her family, into holding everyone together, into standing by Kirk when the world doubted them, and now, on this vacation meant for healing, all of it had unraveled in a matter of days. As she wheeled her luggage into the hallway, she was stopped by one of her closest friends on the trip, someone who had stayed mostly quiet through the chaos. With tears in her eyes, the friend whispered, I'm sorry you went through this. You didn't deserve it. For a moment, Rasheeda's heart softened, but the damage was already too deep. She hugged her friend tightly, whispered thank you, and kept walking. That was the image etched in her memory, leaving the resort with her head high, dragging her suitcase behind her like a weight of everything she had endured, while the sun blazed down as if mocking the storm raging inside her. On the plane ride home, she sat by the window, sunglasses covering her eyes, refusing to look at Kirk even though he sat just a seat away. The silence between them was louder than any argument they had ever had. It was like sitting next to a stranger, she admitted. The flight attendants smiled politely, oblivious to the silent war being waged between husband and wife. But Rasheeda's mind was spinning with questions. Could she ever forgive him for laughing at her pain? Could she ever look at her family the same way after realizing how icily they turned against her? And most of all, could she keep pretending to the world that she was okay when inside she felt completely shattered? Those were the questions haunting her as the plane touched down, and she knew life would never be the same again. But just when she thought the nightmare was over, things took another unexpected turn. Because what waited for her back home wasn't peace, it was an even bigger storm fueled by gossip, fan speculation, and the cruel power of social media. The vacation might have ended, but the battle for her dignity, her marriage, and her truth was only just beginning. When Rasheeda landed back in Atlanta, she expected at least a quiet return, a moment to breathe after the chaos of that vacation. But instead, the airport itself felt like a stage. Phones were out, flashes went off, and whispers trailed her as she walked through the terminal with her sunglasses pulled low and her lips pressed tight. Somehow, before she had even stepped foot off the plane, word of the blow-ups had already spread. "It was like the whole world knew before I even touched down," she said, shaking her head at how fast the drama had leaped from private pain to public spectacle. The first sting came when she checked her phone, scrolling through messages and DMs that piled up like waves crashing against her sanity. Friends, acquaintances, even fans were asking the same question. What really happened on that trip? Screenshots of shady captions posted by certain relatives were circulating online, suggesting Rasheeda had been exposed, while cryptic emojis from Kirk's side of the family added fuel to the fire. By the time she got home, blogs had already picked up the story, writing headlines like "Did Rasheeda walk out on Kirk during family vacation?" An explosive drama at Paradise Resort leaves fans shocked. Rasheeda admitted she wanted to crawl into bed and hide from the world, but the war didn't stop at her doorstep. Within hours, her phone rang off the hook. Close friends wanted the truth, producers wanted details, and her kids caught in the crossfire were asking questions she didn't know how to answer. "That's when it hit me," she explained, her voice tightening. "This wasn't just about a vacation anymore. This was about my family's name, my marriage, my image, and everyone was watching to see if I'd crumble." The nights that followed were some of the hardest. Kirk barely spoke to her, moving through the house like a shadow, cold and distant. The silence was worse than the shouting. It was like he had already checked out emotionally, Rasheeda confessed. "Like he wasn't my husband anymore, just some man sharing my space." She tried to talk, to reach for him, but every attempt ended in him brushing her off or throwing the blame back on her shoulders. "You embarrassed me in front of my family," he snapped one night, his tone sharp enough to cut. Rasheeda fired back, tears in her eyes. "You embarrassed me in front of the world." The argument went nowhere, leaving her lying awake while Kirk slept in the guest room. The physical distance between them as glaring as the emotional chasm that had opened during the trip. But as always with Rasheeda's life, the private drama couldn't stay private for long. Within a week, a relative who had been on the trip went live on social media, dropping hints and laughing about vacation fights without naming names. Fans flooded the comments, connecting dots, and soon the story spun into full-blown rumor that Rasheeda had walked out on Kirk, that she had threatened divorce, that fists had nearly flown at one point. "People were making up lies faster than I could even keep up with them," she said. The betrayal cut even deeper when she realized it wasn't strangers fueling the fire, it was her own family, feeding gossip blogs for clout and attention. The emotional toll weighed on her heavily. She described sitting in her car one night, engine off, staring at the steering wheel and wondering if she even had the strength to keep going. "I felt broken," she admitted, "like every piece of me had been stripped away, and I didn't know how to put myself back together." Yet at the same time, a flicker of determination sparked in her chest. If the world was going to paint her as the villain, she decided, then she was going to reclaim her story. And that's when she agreed to the exclusive interview. Her chance to finally tell her side without filters, without edits, without anyone silencing her voice. Still, before she sat down for that camera, Rasheeda had to live through the days that followed the trip, and those days were far from calm. The tension between her and Kirk only deepened, spilling into their professional life. Meetings became battlegrounds, decisions were laced with bitterness, and even their business partners could sense the fracture. Fans, too, picked up on the strain, pointing out in comments how the couple no longer looked united, how their smiles seemed forced in recent photos. The very image they had spent years repairing was unraveling thread by thread, and Rasheeda couldn't stop it. And just when she thought she had faced the worst, another twist blindsided her. One evening, while scrolling through her phone, she stumbled across a video that left her breathless. It was filmed secretly during the vacation, showing a snippet of the yacht blowout. The clip wasn't long, just enough to capture her shouting at Kirk, accusing him of betrayal while relatives gasped in the background, but it spread online like wildfire. Fans are shocked. The blogs screamed, dissecting her every word, questioning the future of her marriage, turning her private pain into viral entertainment. That video broke me all over again, she confessed, her eyes glistening. It was like reliving the worst moment of my life, but this time in front of millions of strangers. She couldn't escape it. Everywhere she went, whispers followed. At the grocery store, she caught people glancing at her, phones in hand. At events, questions were lobbed at her under the guise of concern, and online hashtags trended about her marriage's downfall. The family that had once leaned on her now seemed content to watch her burn, their silence louder than any defense. I realized then, she said, her tone heavy, that the vacation didn't just break MIT, broke everything I thought I could trust. And yet, as painful as it was, Rasheeda hinted that the story wasn't finished. Because behind the betrayal, behind the viral drama, there was one final truth that had yet to surface, one revelation from that trip that not even the blogs or the fans had uncovered. And when she revealed it, it would change everything people thought they knew about the vacation that broke her. After the plane ride, the airport chaos, and the first waves of social media speculation, Rasheeda thought she could finally retreat into the sanctuary of home. But peace proved impossible. The moment she stepped inside, the energy felt off, thick with tension. Like the walls themselves were holding on to the echoes of the trip. Kirk barely glanced her way, moving through the house with an indifferent air, while certain relatives who had stayed behind seemed to enjoy recounting their version of the events in front of anyone who would listen. Rasheeda admitted that she felt trapped in a surreal world where the vacation hadn't ended, it had followed her home, leaving trails of whispers, suspicion, and resentment in every room. She described an afternoon when she tried to have a calm conversation with Kirk, hoping to clear the air, but it quickly deteriorated. I thought we could finally talk, really talk, she said, voice trembling. But the moment I mentioned what happened on the boat, he snapped. He said I was overreacting, that I was making mountains out of molehills, that I always needed to make everything about me. Her heart sank, not because of the argument itself, but because she realized the man who had once been her protector now refused to validate her pain. Emotions ran high, tempers flared, and the house echoed with voices that she hadn't expected to hear. Adding fuel to the fire, Rasheeda revealed that certain family members took the opportunity to manipulate situations to their advantage. It felt like a chess game, and I didn't even know the rules, she admitted. People were whispering to Kirk, telling him I was overreacting. Others were turning my friends against me, and I was in the middle, trying to survive the storm without losing myself completely. At that moment, she realized the trip had not just broken her, it had exposed vulnerabilities she never knew existed. Vulnerabilities that others weren't shy about exploiting. One evening, the tension reached a crescendo when a cousin, someone Rasheeda had trusted, implicitly confronted her in the living room. Their voice was low, but the words cut deep. "You're too dramatic. You make everything bigger than it is. Maybe if you were less sensitive, people wouldn't be talking about you behind your back." Rasheeda's blood ran cold. She had spent the entire trip trying to hold on to her dignity, to stay composed, to survive the drama, and here it was again. A fresh betrayal delivered quietly yet powerfully. She snapped, voice rising like a tidal wave. "I've been nothing but honest, nothing but loyal, and this is what I get. You turn on me too." The family member froze, taken aback by the intensity, but the damage was done. Emotions ran high, and the house seemed to shake under the weight of the conflict. Fans would have been shocked if they had seen the breakdown behind closed doors. Rasheeda, usually composed and resilient, was confronting people she thought were allies and realizing she had been fighting alone for weeks. Nights were sleepless, mornings were heavy, and even the mundane tasks of daily life felt like battles. Grocery runs, calls with friends, and even simple drives through the city became emotionally charged. Every glance, every word, every interaction carried the weight of judgment, rumor, and speculation. Rasheeda admitted, it wasn't just the vacation. It was everything that came after: the way people whispered, the way they judged, the way they watched me struggle and didn't even offer a hand. The public drama didn't help. Blogs, fan pages, and social media accounts were relentless, posting updates and stirring speculation about her marriage, her family, and her mental state. Every post, every comment, every reaction served as a reminder that the world was watching, waiting for her to break further. She confessed that there were moments she wanted to disappear completely, to step away from the scrutiny, but the pull of her public life, her responsibilities, and her pride kept her rooted in the storm. I couldn't hide. I wasn't allowed to hide, she said. And yet, amidst all the heartbreak and betrayal, Rasheeda found flickers of strength. She began documenting her feelings, writing down what happened during the trip, recording conversations, and reflecting on the layers of conflict that had unfolded. It became a way to reclaim her narrative, to process the trauma, and to plan a path forward. But as she dug deeper, she realized that the trip had left scars that went far beyond arguments or misunderstandings. It had shifted the dynamics of her relationships, exposed hidden agendas, and revealed who truly stood by her when everything seemed to fall apart. Then came the most shocking revelation of all, a betrayal that nobody had anticipated. A message surfaced from someone she considered a friend, a confidant who had been on the trip. It was casual on the surface, almost playful. But the underlying message confirmed what she had feared. Whispers, gossip, and manipulations had been planned long before they even arrived at the resort. The so-called vacation accident was anything but accidental. Rasheeda said she felt a mix of disbelief, anger, and devastation. I realized then that this wasn't just chaos. This was orchestrated. Every fight, every argument, every betrayal had been set up to test me, to humiliate me, to break me, she admitted, voice heavy with emotion. In the days that followed, Rasheeda tried to confront the orchestrators, demanding answers, explanations, and accountability. But each conversation spiraled into more conflict, more misunderstandings, more heated exchanges that left her questioning everything. The family was divided, loyalties were tested, and emotions ran higher than ever. She recalled one particularly tense night where she stood in the kitchen, face to face with Kirk, trying to demand clarity, only for him to deflect, minimize, and, once again, laugh at her pain. It was in that moment she realized that the real struggle wasn't just surviving the vacation, it was surviving the aftermath, navigating the fallout, and protecting herself while everyone else watched like spectators in a cruel game. Rasheeda admitted that even though she was broken, even though the vacation had nearly destroyed her sense of self, she refused to let it define her. She began seeking therapy, leaning on trusted friends, and setting boundaries with the relatives who had contributed to the chaos. I couldn't change what happened, she said, but I could decide how I moved forward, how I rebuilt myself, and how I refused to let them win. Yet, as she prepared for the exclusive interview, she acknowledged the lingering pain. The vacation that broke her hadn't just been a story of fights and betrayal, it was a lesson in survival, resilience, and discovering who you could truly rely on when everything else fell apart. Even now, Rasheeda's voice trembled when recounting the moments of isolation, the tears shed in silence, and the feeling of being betrayed by the people she loved most. Fans listening would feel her heartbreak, understand the depth of her struggle, and realize that behind the social media posts and public appearances lay a woman who had been tested to her limits. And though the drama seemed never-ending, Rasheeda's determination to reclaim her life, her narrative, and her peace shone through, promising that while the vacation had broken her, it would not destroy her. As the days turned into weeks after the trip, Rasheeda found herself navigating a maze of emotions that seemed to shift every hour. She described waking up in the mornings with her chest tight, anticipating the next wave of gossip or confrontation. Even the simplest tasks, answering texts, scrolling social media, checking emails, felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of snakes. Every notification was a potential landmine. I felt like the world had turned against me overnight, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Like everyone I trusted had been in on some secret I didn't even know existed. Fans who had always admired her for her poise and strength were stunned to hear her recount these moments of vulnerability, realizing that even the most composed personalities could be driven to the edge. The fallout wasn't limited to personal relationships. It crept into her professional life as well. Collaborations and business meetings became tense, with subtle digs and awkward silences reminding her that the trip had shifted perceptions in ways she hadn't anticipated. Partners who once praised her decisiveness now whispered behind her back, questioning her judgment and resilience. It was exhausting, Rasheeda admitted. You try to be professional, to carry on as normal, but people look at you differently after drama like this. It changes the energy in the room, and sometimes it feels like everyone is waiting for you to fail again. The mental toll was immense, yet she refused to retreat entirely, determined to maintain her responsibilities while processing the emotional damage. One of the most painful realizations came when Rasheeda learned that some of the family members who had sided against her on the trip were now actively spreading narratives that painted her as the villain. Social media posts, subtle hints in conversations, and vague comments during family gatherings all contributed to a narrative she didn't recognize. It's like I was living in a story written by someone else, she said, her voice trembling. Everything I said, everything I did, was twisted into proof that I was overreacting, controlling, or selfish. She admitted that she often spent nights awake, replaying conversations and trying to piece together how the trip, which had begun as a hopeful escape, had evolved into a masterclass in betrayal. The tension reached a breaking point during a family brunch a few days after returning home. Rasheeda recounted that she tried to keep the mood light, to engage in normal conversation, but every attempt was met with subtle jabs. Someone commented on how she had been too dramatic on the boat. Another mocked her for supposedly overreacting at dinner. Voices rose, tempers flared, and soon the room was filled with the echoes of old arguments resurfacing. Rasheeda felt herself shrinking, her heart pounding, but she refused to remain silent. I finally stood up, she said, her eyes glistening. I told them, all, if you're going to treat me like this, don't expect me to pretend everything is okay. I'm done hiding my feelings, done pretending I'm fine when I'm not. Her confrontation caused shockwaves. Some relatives froze, realizing for the first time that Rasheeda was no longer willing to tolerate disrespect. Others tried to placate her, offering half-hearted apologies or explanations that did little to ease the sting. Kirk, meanwhile, remained largely silent, his own guilt and defensiveness creating an invisible barrier between them. Rasheeda admitted that this was one of the hardest moments looking at her husband and realizing that the intimacy and trust they once shared had eroded to the point where words alone could not bridge the gap. Fans following the story were captivated by the raw honesty. Rasheeda's recounting of her struggles resonated deeply, revealing the human side of someone who often appeared invincible. She described long nights of self-reflection, journaling her feelings, and seeking support from friends who had remained loyal. Therapy became a sanctuary, a space where she could process the trauma of the trip without judgment or interference. It was the first time I could just be honest with myself, she said. No cameras, no family, no judgment, just me, my thoughts, and the truth I had been ignoring for too long. Even with therapy and support, the healing process was complicated. Rasheeda had to navigate the delicate balance between addressing the betrayals of the trip and maintaining a semblance of normalcy in her public life. Photo shoots, interviews, and appearances were all opportunities for scrutiny, and she admitted that she often felt like she was performing strength rather than genuinely embodying it. But through it all, she discovered a resilience she hadn't fully appreciated before. The trip had broken her, yes, but it had also forced her to confront the realities of her relationships, the manipulations she had tolerated, and the strength she possessed to withstand them. The final twist came when Rasheeda uncovered a deeper layer of deception. Messages and private conversations revealed that some conflicts during the vacation had been orchestrated, with certain relatives feeding information to Kirk and others to manipulate outcomes. She realized that what she had initially perceived as spontaneous drama was, in fact, carefully calculated to test her reactions and fracture her confidence. I felt like I was living in a scripted reality show without knowing I'd signed the contract, she said, her tone a mixture of anger and incredulity. This revelation reshaped her understanding of the entire vacation, confirming that the trip had been more than just a series of unfortunate events. It had been a coordinated assault on her emotional stability. Despite the betrayal, Rasheeda emerged with a renewed sense of agency. She began setting boundaries, choosing whom to trust, and reclaiming the narrative around her life. While the scars of the vacation would remain, she vowed not to let them define her. Fans were inspired by her honesty and courage, recognizing that the trip had been a turning point, a moment that tested the limits of her strength and resilience. And while some questions remained unresolved about loyalty, family dynamics, and the future of her marriage, Rasheeda's journey highlighted the power of confronting truth head-on, even when it hurts, and refusing to let manipulation and betrayal dictate the course of one's life. As the weeks continued to pass, the tension that had begun on the vacation seemed to follow Rasheeda like a shadow, persistent and unrelenting. She admitted that even mundane moments, pouring herself a cup of coffee, answering the door, or simply scrolling through her phone could trigger memories of arguments, backhanded comments, and the sense of betrayal that had been sown in the middle of paradise. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, and sometimes I wondered if I could ever feel normal again, she said, her voice low but steady. The relentless nature of the fallout forced her to confront the reality that the vacation hadn't just broken her momentarily. It had upended the foundations of her personal life and forced her to re-examine every relationship in her inner circle. One evening, in particular, Rasheeda recounted a confrontation with one of Kirk's cousins who had played a significant role in stirring the drama. The cousin? attempting to offer what they claimed was constructive advice, leaned in with a patronizing tone and said, "Maybe if you weren't so sensitive, things wouldn't have escalated." That comment, Rasheeda admitted, was like a spark to dry kindling. She lost her composure, her words spilling out in a torrent of anger and frustration. "Sensitive. Sensitive. I held us all together, and you have the audacity to call me sensitive." Emotions ran high as voices clashed once more, and the living room felt like a battlefield where old grievances collided with new resentments. Meanwhile, Kirk's silence, or at times, his passive complicity, added another layer of torment. Rasheeda described trying repeatedly to engage him, to rebuild even a sliver of trust, only to be met with dismissiveness or subtle digs. "It was like I was invisible and irrelevant all at once," she confessed. "He wasn't speaking up to defend me, yet he also didn't leave." It was this weird, painful limbo that kept me on edge all the time. Fans, listening to her recount the aftermath, could sense the unbearable tension, understanding that the public perception of a strong, united couple had been shattered behind closed doors. The online frenzy didn't help matters. Every post, every story, every cryptic comment online seemed calculated to provoke a reaction or further destabilize her. Rasheeda admitted that she sometimes caught herself reading threads of speculation late at night, wondering how much of the narrative had been shaped by the very people who were supposed to have her back. Each notification felt like a test, each headline a reminder that the drama was far from over. And while some fans reached out with support, countless others joined in the gossip, dissecting every detail, adding to the psychological weight she carried. Then came the moment that truly crystallized the depth of the betrayal. A private conversation between Kirk and another family member surfaced, one that Rasheeda had no knowledge of at the time, which revealed that much of the tension on the vacation had been manipulated and intentionally inflamed. Certain relatives had shared selective information, painted her reactions in the worst possible light, and orchestrated situations to provoke confrontations. "It was like living in a movie where everyone else knew the script except me," she said. The revelation left her reeling, a mix of anger, disbelief, and grief washing over her in waves. Despite the emotional upheaval, Rasheeda found pockets of strength. She began confiding in close friends and allies who had remained loyal throughout the ordeal. She documented her feelings meticulously, often late into the night, using writing as both a coping mechanism and a way to process the intricate web of betrayals and tensions. "I had to reclaim my own narrative," she said. "Otherwise, the story of me would always be told by other people, and I would remain a character in someone else's drama instead of the author of my own life." The healing process, however, was neither linear nor easy. Rasheeda admitted that every time she believed she had gained some peace, a reminder of the vacation weather, a comment, a post, or a subtle glance from a family member would pull her back into the emotional turmoil. She found herself pacing, journaling, and reflecting deeply on each interaction, trying to differentiate between genuine remorse and performative gestures. "It felt like walking through a minefield of emotions," she said, never knowing which step would trigger another explosion. The lessons she drew from the experience were harsh but illuminating. She realized that boundaries were essential, that trust could be fragile, and that her own strength was more resilient than she had ever imagined. While the vacation had broken her, it had also forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about loyalty, manipulation, and the complexities of family dynamics. She described this period as one of the most transformative of her life, a painful but necessary awakening to the realities of those around her and the necessity of self-preservation. And just when she thought she had navigated through the worst, another twist awaited, a revelation that would leave fans gasping. Rasheeda discovered that one relative had secretly recorded portions of the vacation, snippets meant to be shared selectively, fueling gossip and speculation online. The idea that private moments had been weaponized against her, that laughter, arguments, and vulnerable admissions had been turned into ammunition, was almost too much to bear. "It was like everything I thought was mine had been stolen and turned into a story I had no control over," she said, shaking her head. Through all of this, Rasheeda emphasized the importance of reclaiming her agency. She sought therapy, leaned on trusted friends, and began setting firm boundaries with those who had contributed to the chaos. Social media became a tool for transparency rather than validation, a platform where she could assert her own truth without being hijacked by gossip. And slowly, incrementally, she began to rebuild, acknowledging the pain while refusing to let it define her. The vacation, which had begun as an escape, had ended as a crucible, testing the limits of Rasheeda's endurance, resilience, and emotional fortitude. Every betrayal, every secret, every manipulation had chipped away at her sense of security. Yet in the process, she discovered depths of strength and clarity she had never known. Fans listening to her story could feel the intensity of the journey, the rawness of her vulnerability, and the courage it took to confront the fallout head. And while the scars of that vacation would remain, Rasheeda emerged determined not only to survive but to reclaim her narrative, her dignity, and her life on her own terms. Rasheeda's life after the vacation became a landscape of unrelenting chaos and emotional turbulence that seemed to stretch into every corner of her existence, shaping her days and nights with an intensity that was both exhausting and transformative, leaving her grappling with the raw edges of betrayal, disappointment, and revelation while simultaneously forcing her to confront the stark realities of relationships she had once believed to be unshakable. The first few days back home were marked by a suffocating silence that hung over the house like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate, with Kirk moving through the rooms as though he were a stranger sharing the same space, and certain relatives who had played a role in the drama of the trip whispering just loud enough for her to hear, reminding her at every turn that the vacation had not merely ended but had metastasized into a sprawling, invasive presence in her life that no amount of distance could contain. Rasheeda recalled waking each morning with a tightness in her chest, an anticipatory anxiety that made even the simplest tasks feel like navigating a minefield. Every text message, every notification, every phone call became a potential trigger, a reminder that the echoes of the resort were not confined to memory but had followed her into the very fabric of daily existence, turning mundane moments into charged emotional encounters and ordinary interactions into tests of patience and endurance. She described sitting at the kitchen table one morning, staring at a cup of coffee as though it held answers to questions she did not yet know how to ask, while Kirk quietly shuffled past her, eyes downcast, ears closed, offering neither acknowledgement nor apology, and the house itself seemed complicit in the tension, the silence heavy and almost physical, pressing down on her shoulders with a weight that made breathing feel labored. The realization that the vacation had been orchestrated in part by family members she had trusted was perhaps the most devastating blow, as it unveiled a layer of premeditated manipulation that transformed her perception of every argument, every raised voice, and every awkward exchange that had occurred during those fateful days. She understood now that the so-called spontaneous conflicts had been carefully curated to provoke, destabilize, and reveal weaknesses, and the magnitude of the betrayal left her staggering in disbelief, her mind replaying conversations and moments with a forensic intensity as she sought to untangle truth from deception, loyalty from duplicity. The impact extended beyond personal relationships, seeping insidiously into her professional sphere, as the tension and emotional residue influenced interactions with business partners, colleagues, and collaborators who sensed the fragility of her current state and, whether consciously or unconsciously, responded with subtle skepticism or hesitation, turning meetings into psychological battlegrounds and negotiations into performances where she had to simultaneously project confidence while masking the internal turmoil that threatened to unravel at any moment. Rasheeda admitted to feeling like a character in someone else's narrative, her actions scrutinized and interpreted through lenses shaped by gossip, social media speculation, and the whispers of those who had once posed as allies, leaving her struggling to reclaim agency in a world that seemed eager to define her experience for her, to rewrite her reactions as evidence of fragility or melodrama rather than the legitimate responses of someone confronted with orchestrated betrayal and profound disappointment. One evening, an encounter with a cousin who had been complicit in the manipulation crystallized the depth of the divide. Leaning in with a tone of feigned concern, the cousin remarked on Rasheeda's dramatic tendencies during the trip, a comment delivered with a casualness that belied the years of calculated undermining behind it, and Rasheeda, confronted with the raw audacity of such a statement, felt a surge of anger and grief that left her voice shaking as she responded, "I've spent my life holding this family together, and you call me dramatic? You mock my feelings and then pretend it's advice." The confrontation escalated quickly, voices overlapping, emotions flaring, the air heavy with the tension of unspoken grievances and cumulative hurt, leaving Rasheeda both physically and emotionally drained, yet resolute in her refusal to let the manipulation go unchallenged. Even amidst the turmoil, she sought refuge in small acts of self-preservation, leaning on trusted friends who had remained loyal and offering a lifeline of support that counterbalanced the betrayals that had dominated the vacation and its aftermath. She documented her experiences meticulously, recording not only the sequence of events but also the emotional resonance of each interaction, using writing as a tool to process the complexity of her circumstances, to parse the motives behind actions, and to begin reclaiming a narrative that had been hijacked by others for their own gain. Social media, while a source of additional stress, became a platform for careful assertion of truth, a space where Rasheeda could offer her perspective without allowing herself to be completely engulfed by the swirl of speculation and rumor that had erupted in the wake of the vacation. She recognized the necessity of setting boundaries, of filtering the noise, and of prioritizing her own emotional health above the demands and judgments of an audience that often consumed drama voraciously, without regard for the human consequences behind it. Therapy became a cornerstone of her recovery, providing a structured environment in which to confront the pain of betrayal, the complexities of familial manipulation, and the psychological toll of having private moments weaponized for public consumption. Through guided reflection, Rasheeda began to untangle the web of deceit and emotion that had ensnared her, learning not only to process the trauma but also to recognize patterns, anticipate manipulative behaviors, and strengthen her own resilience in ways that would allow her to navigate future conflicts with clarity and self-assuredness. The interplay between public perception and private reality was a constant theme in her narrative, as she struggled to reconcile the image of composure and control presented to fans and followers with the chaotic, emotionally charged reality she experienced behind closed doors. This duality created a persistent tension that colored every interaction, leaving her both hyper-aware of external judgment and painfully attuned to internal vulnerability. Amidst the ongoing challenges, Rasheeda also discovered the unexpected value of self, noting that the vacation, as harrowing as it had been, functioned as an unflinching mirror, exposing not only the fractures in relationships, but also her own thresholds of endurance, capacity for forgiveness, and limits of trust. It was through this lens that she began to identify which bonds were worth preserving, which dynamics required recalibration, and which individuals had proven themselves incapable of honoring her dignity. In parallel, the release of the secretly recorded video from the trip acted as both catalyst and crucible, intensifying public scrutiny while simultaneously providing undeniable evidence of the orchestrated tensions she had endured, giving her a factual foundation to counter narratives spun by relatives and acquaintances who had sought to manipulate perception. Fans responded with a mixture of empathy, shock, and support, amplifying Rasheeda's voice and validating her lived experience in ways that mitigated some of the psychological weight imposed by the betrayals she had faced. Throughout this period, she emphasized the importance of boundaries, asserting control over her environment and interactions to the extent possible, refusing to allow manipulative family members or opportunistic observers to dictate the terms of her emotional or social landscape. Each decision, each boundary set, became an act of reclaiming agency and reinforcing a sense of self that had been deeply challenged by the vacation and its aftermath. Rasheeda also reflected on the cumulative impact of stress and emotional turbulence, noting how the intensity of the experience forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about dependency, loyalty, and the fragility of relationships once taken for granted. These insights, while painful, offered a roadmap for personal growth, resilience, and a recalibrated approach to trust and interpersonal engagement. In addition to therapy and reflection, she found solace in creative expression, channeling her emotions into writing, dialogue, and storytelling as a means of externalizing internal conflict, gaining perspective, and asserting ownership over her narrative. The act of articulating her experiences became a form of empowerment, transforming moments of despair into a structured, coherent recounting that could withstand external scrutiny while honoring the authenticity of her feelings. The vacation, and its cascading consequences, also illuminated the complexities of public perception in the age of social media, where private conflicts are rapidly amplified, dissected, and transformed into consumable drama, often devoid of context or empathy. Rasheeda's experience served as a potent reminder that navigating visibility, influence, and interpersonal dynamics requires vigilance, discernment, and a willingness to prioritize self-preservation over appeasing external expectations. Ultimately, through months of reflection, confrontation, therapy, and strategic boundary setting, Rasheeda began to reconstruct a sense of self that was both resilient and self-aware, integrating lessons learned from the betrayals and orchestrated chaos of the vacation into a framework for navigating future challenges with confidence, clarity, and emotional fortitude. The process was neither linear nor easy, punctuated by setbacks, lingering doubts, and ongoing negotiations with family dynamics. Yet it fostered a profound awareness of personal strength, the imperatives of trust and discernment, and the necessity of reclaiming agency in a world eager to appropriate her story. As she prepared for the exclusive interview that would share her side of the story with the world, Rasheeda's narrative was defined by both pain and empowerment, a complex tapestry of betrayal, revelation, and resilience, offering fans an intimate glimpse into the unfiltered reality of surviving emotional manipulation, public scrutiny, and familial discord, while simultaneously asserting the enduring strength, agency, and self-determination that had allowed her to navigate one of the most challenging chapters of her life. The interview, she explained, was not merely a recounting of events but a declaration of ownership, a refusal to be defined by the orchestrations, rumors, or judgments of others, and an affirmation of the lessons learned in resilience, trust, and self-preservation. Through her candid storytelling, she invited viewers to witness the complexity of human relationships, the fragility and strength of personal bonds, and the courage required to confront betrayal, reclaim narrative control, and emerge with both dignity and insight intact, demonstrating that even in the wake of profound emotional disruption, one can find clarity, empowerment, and the resolve to move forward with authenticity and confidence. The intricate web of interpersonal dynamics, manipulation, and public attention continued to challenge Rasheeda, demanding constant vigilance yet through structured reflection, therapeutic intervention, and intentional boundary setting, she gradually reconstructed an internal landscape where trust could be cautiously extended, personal agency reinforced, and emotional resilience cultivated, transforming the vacation that had initially broken her into a crucible that ultimately illuminated the depths of her strength, the clarity of her judgment, and the unwavering commitment to honor her own truth in the face of relentless scrutiny and orchestrated betrayal, ensuring that the lessons of hardship would inform her future interactions, relationships, and personal trajectory with wisdom and fortitude. Rasheeda's life after the vacation became an unrelenting cascade of emotional turbulence, where each day felt like navigating a labyrinth of betrayals, half-truths, and simmering tensions that had followed her home from what was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. And she recounted with raw honesty how the very walls of her house seemed to echo the unresolved conflicts and subtle manipulations that had been seeded during those fateful days, making even the simplest routines feel like exercises in endurance, with the weight of whispered conversations, lingering glances, and silent judgments pressing down on her at every turn, creating a suffocating atmosphere that refused to lift no matter how much she tried to seek peace. And as she reflected on the ongoing fallout, Rasheeda described waking each morning with a mixture of dread and anticipation, unsure what new twist, comment, or revelation would confront her next, her mind spinning with scenarios that were both imagined and real, as she tried to parse who was genuinely supportive and who had contributed to the orchestrated chaos that had upended her sense of stability and trust, a process that was exhausting both mentally and emotionally, leaving her drained yet determined to assert her own narrative and reclaim agency over her life. She shared the intensity of a confrontation with Kirk, where attempts at dialogue and reconciliation only spiraled into defensiveness, deflection, and a painfully familiar pattern of minimization that left her questioning not only his loyalty, but also the authenticity of their partnership. And she detailed how this tension spilled into interactions with family members, some of whom had actively participated in fueling drama during the trip and now continued to whisper, manipulate, or provoke in subtle ways designed to test her resilience, while others remained silent, complicit in their inaction, further isolating her emotionally. Rasheeda recounted moments when cousins, friends, or acquaintances approached her with ostensibly helpful comments that carried an undercurrent of judgment or critique. Phrases like, maybe you overreacted or you're too sensitive landing like punches. And each encounter required her to summon every ounce of composure to respond without escalating, though inside she felt a storm of frustration, disbelief, and sadness, realizing that the very people she had trusted were often the ones undermining her at the most critical moments, and that the vacation, which she had once imagined as a reprieve, had instead exposed deep fissures in relationships she had taken for granted, challenging her to reconsider the foundations of trust, loyalty, and family bonds that she had long assumed were unshakable. She described the surreal experience of returning home and discovering private communications and hidden recordings that revealed the extent to which the conflicts had been orchestrated, messages exchanged to manipulate perceptions, engineer confrontations, and turn casual interactions into weapons, leaving her grappling with the realization that she had been navigating a highly calculated emotional minefield. And the sense of betrayal cut deep, fueling a mixture of anger, hurt, and incredulity that she had never experienced before. And in recounting these discoveries during the interview, she emphasized the psychological toll of realizing that so many aspects of her reality had been controlled, distorted, or misrepresented by those she had considered allies. Rasheeda also spoke candidly about the impact on her mental health, describing sleepless nights spent replaying conversations, dissecting events, and attempting to differentiate between actual slights and imagined ones. A mental exhaustion compounded by the pressure of maintaining a public persona that demanded composure, strength, and charisma while privately feeling fractured and vulnerable. And she revealed the profound sense of isolation that accompanied this dual existence, where every step, word, and decision was weighed against the potential for further manipulation, gossip, or misinterpretation, leaving her constantly on edge and hyper-aware of both the intentions of those around her and the perceptions of fans and the public. The social media response added another layer of complexity, as Rasheeda navigated posts, comments, and speculations that often misrepresented her experiences or amplified misunderstandings, turning what should have been a private emotional journey into a spectacle for public consumption. And she described the frustration of feeling observed, judged, and analyzed in real time, with little room for error or authentic vulnerability, while simultaneously recognizing that transparency offered a pathway to reclaim narrative control, to clarify misconceptions, and to assert her truth amidst the noise and distortion created by both family machinations and public curiosity. Therapy became a lifeline, providing a structured space to process the emotional turbulence, to confront the betrayal she had endured, and to build strategies for navigating future interactions with resilience and clarity. And she detailed how, through repeated reflection, guided exercises, and honest dialogue with a professional, she began to understand not only the motives behind the orchestrations and manipulations she had faced, but also her own emotional patterns, reactions, and areas for personal growth, allowing her to reclaim a sense of agency and self-determination that had been challenged but not destroyed. Rasheeda's narrative highlighted the importance of setting boundaries, both with family members who had contributed to the chaos and with herself, learning to discern between constructive criticism and manipulative interference, and to prioritize emotional well-being over appeasing or placating those whose intentions were compromised, a process that involved difficult conversations, firm refusals, and sometimes the painful decision to distance herself from relationships that were irreparably toxic. She described how documenting her experiences, writing down events, emotions, and reflections, became both a coping mechanism and a form of empowerment, allowing her to articulate her reality in a coherent and structured way, to validate her feelings, and to create a record that could counter false narratives or distortions propagated by others. And in doing so, she began to reclaim ownership over the story of the vacation and its aftermath, transforming it from a source of helplessness into an opportunity for insight, resilience, and personal growth. Despite the ongoing challenges, Rasheeda found moments of clarity and strength, recognizing that the vacation, while devastating, had illuminated aspects of her life, relationships, and self-perception that had previously been obscured, providing a stark but necessary lens through which to assess loyalty, trust, and emotional boundaries, and to make intentional choices about the people, situations, and patterns she would allow to influence her moving forward. The uncovering of secret recordings and hidden messages further reinforced the need for vigilance, self-protection, and discernment, as she realized that even seemingly innocuous interactions could be manipulated or weaponized, demanding a heightened awareness and strategic approach to both private and public communications. And she shared with viewers how this awareness, while initially overwhelming, eventually fostered a stronger sense of self-reliance, emotional intelligence, and assertiveness. Throughout the recounting, Rasheeda emphasized that the journey was not solely about overcoming betrayal but also about cultivating resilience, reclaiming narrative authority, and learning to navigate the complexities of interpersonal dynamics with grace, discernment, and emotional fortitude. A message that resonated deeply with fans who were captivated by the combination of vulnerability, authenticity, and empowerment she displayed, demonstrating that even in the face of orchestrated chaos and profound disappointment, it was possible to emerge with clarity, strength, and a renewed commitment to personal truth. The interview provided an unflinching look at the emotional aftermath of a vacation that had initially seemed idyllic but ultimately revealed hidden fractures, manipulations, and betrayals, allowing Rasheeda to share not only the pain and disillusionment she endured but also the strategies, reflections, and coping mechanisms that enabled her to reclaim agency, establish boundaries, and foster resilience in the wake of intense personal and familial drama, creating a powerful narrative of endurance, self-awareness, and transformation that underscored the complexity of human relationships and the capacity for personal growth, even amidst profound adversity. Rasheeda's life following the fateful vacation unfolded like a storm that refused to dissipate, each day layering emotional turbulence atop the last, creating a dense, almost suffocating atmosphere where every interaction, whether mundane or significant, charged with the weight of unresolved conflicts, lingering tensions, and the pervasive aftershocks of betrayal. And she recounted with a raw honesty that captured both the fragility and the resilience of the human spirit, detailing how waking each morning became an exercise in navigating a labyrinth of anxieties, with the anticipation of discovering new slights, overheard comments, or subtle manipulations that had followed her from the resort into the very fabric of her daily life, turning even simple routines, like making coffee, checking messages, or engaging with family into moments that required vigilance, emotional regulation, and a careful balancing act between composure and the natural human response to being wronged. And as she reflected on this period, she revealed that the psychological toll was immense, leaving her mentally exhausted and emotionally drained, yet simultaneously cultivating a heightened sense of awareness, resilience, and strategic thinking as she learned to assess the motives, intentions, and reliability of those around her, a skill forged in the crucible of betrayal and manipulation that had defined the aftermath of the trip. She described in vivid detail an encounter with Kirk, where attempts at dialogue, reconciliation, or even casual conversation were met with defensiveness, subtle digs, or a cold neutrality that amplified the sense of isolation and distrust she felt, creating a dynamic where emotional intimacy seemed simultaneously expected and denied, and the tension between them became a microcosm of the broader family and social pressures she navigated, forcing her to confront the reality that not all relationships, even those closest to us, are built on unwavering loyalty or genuine care, and that trust, once fractured, requires intentional effort, boundaries, and often painful confrontation to rebuild. In recounting these experiences, Rasheeda shared how family members who had actively participated in the orchestration of the drama during the vacation continued to engage in subtle manipulations and provocations, whether through whispered comments, veiled criticisms, or strategically timed interventions designed to test her composure, patience, and resilience, and each encounter demanded a conscious response, whether through setting firm boundaries, asserting her perspective, or in some cases, choosing to disengage entirely to protect her emotional well-being, a practice she emphasized as essential for reclaiming personal agency and preventing further erosion of self-esteem and security. The complexity of her experience was further magnified by the role of social media, which transformed private conflict into a public spectacle, amplifying misunderstandings, misrepresenting intentions, and creating a constant feedback loop where speculation, rumor, and judgment from fans and casual observers compounded the stress of navigating already fraught interpersonal dynamics. And Rasheeda detailed the delicate balance of participating in social platforms for transparency while simultaneously filtering the noise, recognizing that selective engagement was necessary to protect both her mental health and the integrity of her narrative, ensuring that she could communicate her truth without being hijacked by external interpretations or distortions. Therapy emerged as a critical component of Rasheeda's recovery and resilience-building process, providing a structured and safe space to unpack the multitude of emotions triggered by the vacation and its lingering consequences, to identify patterns of manipulation and emotional sabotage, and to develop strategies for establishing healthy boundaries, communicating effectively under pressure, and cultivating self-compassion in the face of relentless scrutiny. And she described the therapeutic process as both challenging and enlightening, requiring courage to confront uncomfortable truths, patience to work through layers of hurt, and perseverance to integrate the lessons learned into practical changes in behavior, perception, and relational dynamics, ultimately fostering a greater sense of control, emotional intelligence, and inner strength that allowed her to navigate future interactions with clarity and confidence. Rasheeda's narrative also emphasized the significance of documenting her experiences through journaling and reflective writing, a practice that served both as a therapeutic outlet and as a mechanism for reclaiming authority over her own story, providing a tangible record of events, emotions, and reflections that could be referenced, analyzed, and leveraged to counteract distortions or manipulations from others, creating a personal archive that validated her lived experience and offered both insight and empowerment in navigating ongoing relational complexities. She recounted the discovery of hidden recordings and private messages that confirmed the extent to which conflicts had been orchestrated, revealing that moments which seemed spontaneous during the vacation were in fact carefully planned, manipulated, and strategically amplified by those seeking to provoke reactions, create drama, and reshape narratives to their advantage. A realization that initially induced feelings of shock, betrayal, and incredulity, but eventually catalyzed a conscious commitment to boundary setting, discernment, and self-protection, ensuring that she could engage with relationships and social dynamics from a position of awareness and empowerment, rather than vulnerability to manipulation. The fallout of the vacation permeated professional interactions as well, as Rasheeda noted that colleagues, collaborators, and business partners who were aware of the publicized drama often responded with subtle skepticism, caution, or hesitation, complicating meetings, negotiations, and professional engagements, and compelling her to navigate these interactions with heightened awareness, composure, and strategic communication, balancing authenticity with self-preservation while maintaining professional standards and demonstrating resilience. An ongoing challenge that underscored the interconnectedness of personal and public life in the contemporary social and professional landscape. Throughout her recounting, Rasheeda emphasized the transformative potential of adversity, noting that while the vacation had initially broken her, it also revealed latent strengths, clarified values, and illuminated relational dynamics that had previously been obscured. And she described the gradual process of reclaiming her narrative, reasserting control over her environment, and cultivating emotional resilience as an empowering journey that enabled her to confront betrayal with clarity, navigate manipulation with discernment, and rebuild trust with intent, demonstrating the capacity for personal growth even amidst profound relational upheaval. In addition to these insights, Rasheeda detailed the cumulative impact of prolonged stress and heightened emotional vigilance, noting how sustained exposure to tension, manipulation, and scrutiny necessitated the development of coping strategies, self-care routines, and reflective practices to mitigate psychological strain, maintain focus, and preserve mental health, emphasizing that resilience is not the absence of vulnerability but the conscious cultivation of resources, strategies, and perspectives that allow for sustained functionality, emotional stability, and strategic engagement with both personal and public challenges. She also highlighted the importance of selective transparency, noting that while honesty and openness were crucial in reclaiming narrative authority, discretion regarding which information to share, with whom, and under what circumstances was equally vital in protecting personal boundaries, mitigating exploitation, and ensuring that the story she presented remained authentic and representative of her lived experience rather than being co-opted or distorted by external actors. The interview, in which Rasheeda shared these experiences, became a platform not only for recounting the events and emotional turbulence but also for illustrating the broader lessons of resilience, agency, and self-determination, providing viewers with a nuanced understanding of the complexities of human relationships, the challenges of navigating betrayal, and the strategies for maintaining integrity, emotional health, and empowerment in the face of orchestrated manipulation and public scrutiny. She described in vivid detail the emotional landscape of days following the trip, the interplay of grief, anger, and confusion, the deliberate choices required to navigate family interactions, and the deliberate cultivation of supportive networks to buffer against ongoing tension, illustrating a multidimensional approach to resilience that integrated emotional, cognitive, and social strategies to restore equilibrium and assert control over personal narrative and life trajectory. Moreover, Rasheeda reflected on the paradoxical nature of visibility in the social media era, where private turmoil is amplified, analyzed, and sometimes weaponized, emphasizing that navigating such an environment requires deliberate strategies, selective engagement, and careful boundary setting to protect emotional well-being while asserting narrative authority. And she offered candid observations about the duality of public perception versus private experience, noting that maintaining authenticity while managing impressions and mitigating misrepresentation is both a challenge and an opportunity for growth, discernment, and empowerment. She also recounted how moments of intense vulnerability, though initially became opportunities for connection, empathy, and solidarity with those who had witnessed or shared similar experiences. And she described how fan responses, supportive messages, and acts of solidarity reinforced her sense of agency, validated her lived experience, and provided emotional sustenance that mitigated feelings of isolation, amplifying the importance of community, validation, and shared understanding in navigating personal crises under public scrutiny. Ultimately, Rasheeda's recounting of the vacation and its aftermath highlighted the intricate interplay between personal resilience, relational dynamics, and public visibility, illustrating how betrayal, manipulation, and scrutiny can challenge, destabilize, and transform individuals while simultaneously offering opportunities for insight, empowerment, and the deliberate cultivation of agency, boundaries, and emotional intelligence, underscoring the human capacity to navigate complexity, reclaim narrative authority, and emerge from adversity with clarity, strength, and a renewed commitment to self-determination, integrity, and authentic relational engagement. And in sharing her story, she not only articulated the pain, betrayal, and challenges she faced but also provided a blueprint for resilience, boundary setting, and emotional recovery that resonates broadly, offering insight, guidance, and inspiration to anyone navigating the turbulent intersections of personal relationships, familial complexity, and public scrutiny, demonstrating that even in the aftermath of profound disruption and betrayal, one can rebuild, reclaim agency, and chart a course toward stability, authenticity, and empowered self-expression. Rasheeda's days following the vacation unfolded like an unending storm, each moment heavy with tension and unspoken grievances, a maelstrom of emotions that seemed to seep into every corner of her life, leaving her breathless, anxious, and constantly on edge, as if the events of those supposedly idyllic days had planted seeds of unrest that refused to be buried or ignored. And she described how the atmosphere at home had shifted in ways that were almost palpable, the silence between family members stretching taut like a wire ready to snap, the smallest comment or gesture capable of igniting old conflicts and revealing fresh wounds. And Rasheeda recounted sitting in her living room, coffee in hand, feeling the weight of accumulated betrayals pressing down upon her chest, a physical heaviness that mirrored the emotional burden she carried, the tight knot of tension in her stomach growing tighter with every fleeting glance, whispered remark, or reminder of what had transpired on that trip, where loyalties had been tested, secrets had been revealed, and alliances had fractured, leaving her to navigate a labyrinth of family politics, manipulations, and the delicate task of discerning friend from foe, confidant from opportunist. She remembered a particularly sharp confrontation with Kirk, where what had begun as a tentative attempt at dialogue quickly escalated into defensiveness, deflection, and a cold neutrality that left her staggering between disbelief and fury, as emotions ran high and years of accumulated frustrations poured into a single, combustible moment, leaving both parties raw, exposed, and irrevocably aware of the fractures in their partnership. And she reflected on how this dynamic had mirrored similar patterns throughout the family, a recurring dance of provocation and reaction that seemed almost choreographed, a sinister rhythm that exposed vulnerabilities and tested endurance. And Rasheeda realized that much of the tension had been carefully orchestrated by relatives who had cultivated drama under the guise of care, manipulating circumstances, timing, and conversations to provoke emotional responses, to destabilize her, and to expose perceived weaknesses that could be exploited, leaving her both enraged and grief-stricken as she processed the depth of deceit and duplicity she had encountered, and the realization that what she had assumed to be spontaneous arguments were in fact meticulously engineered left her reeling, questioning the foundation of trust she had long taken for granted. The social media aftermath compounded the pressure, as fans reacted with shock, curiosity, and judgment, amplifying the private conflicts into a spectacle for public consumption, where every nuance was dissected, every interaction scrutinized, and every emotional response consumed as content, intensifying the burden she carried and forcing her to navigate visibility and authenticity under a microscope, while simultaneously maintaining composure, professionalism, and the dignity that had always been central to her public persona, even as internally she struggled with waves of vulnerability, anger, and disbelief, a duality that left her emotionally stretched, yet increasingly aware of the need to assert control over her own narrative, to reclaim authority, and to define the story on her own terms rather than allowing external forces, family or fans alike, to shape perception and interpretation. Rasheeda described how therapy became an essential refuge, a structured space where she could process the accumulation of emotional strain, unpack layers of betrayal, and learn strategies for managing manipulation, establishing boundaries, and fostering resilience. And she recounted the painstaking process of reflection, where each session peeled back the layers of experience, revealing insights into her own patterns of trust, reaction, and self-protection, as well as the motives, behaviors, and relational tactics employed by those around her, providing clarity and a framework for navigating the complex terrain of family dynamics and public scrutiny with a newfound sense of agency, composure, and self-awareness. She also emphasized the power of documentation, of recording not only events but the emotional textures of her experiences, as a tool for validation, analysis, and empowerment, allowing her to reclaim ownership of her story, counter distortions, and process the emotional weight in a tangible, structured way. transforming the chaos of manipulation into a narrative she could control. And the act of writing became both a lifeline and a declaration of resilience, a way to assert that she would not be defined by the orchestrations or judgments of others, but rather by her capacity to endure, reflect, and emerge with clarity and strength, despite the betrayals and public scrutiny that had threatened to consume her. The exposure of hidden recordings and messages further reinforced the depth of orchestration behind the vacation drama, revealing that conflicts, confrontations, and emotional breakdowns had been amplified, provoked, or staged to serve the agendas of those seeking control, influence, or amusement, leaving Rasheeda both astonished and indignant. And in recounting these revelations, she highlighted the strategic ways in which she had learned to navigate such treacherous interpersonal landscapes, from setting non-negotiable boundaries to selectively engaging with certain family members while limiting exposure to toxic influence, and how these choices, though difficult, had become essential in preserving her emotional health and sense of agency, allowing her to reclaim the space necessary to heal, reflect, and plan her next steps with insight and resilience. Rasheeda's days after the vacation spiraled into a continuous whirlwind of emotional upheaval, where every encounter, every glance, and every message seemed fraught with hidden meaning and potential betrayal, leaving her in a constant state of heightened vigilance as she navigated the intricate web of relationships that had been so dramatically affected by the events that had unfolded. And she recounted in painstaking detail the moments of tension with family members whose loyalties had shifted unexpectedly, the subtle manipulations of friends who had once been confidants, now revealing themselves as opportunists, and the constant undercurrent of judgment and speculation from fans and social media observers who had turned her private turmoil into a public spectacle, amplifying her sense of exposure and forcing her to reconcile the disparity between her internal experience and the external narratives being constructed. And she described the exhausting process of parsing truth from distortion, of determining which conversations were genuine and which had been engineered to provoke emotional responses, all while maintaining composure in a world that seemed eager to misinterpret, sensationalize, and exploit every reaction, every word, and every tear. The confrontation with Kirk had left scars that went beyond the immediate exchange, embedding themselves into the fabric of daily life, where attempts at casual conversation or shared activities were overshadowed by lingering resentment, mistrust, and the unspoken awareness that their relationship had been irrevocably altered. And she reflected on the complex interplay of anger, disappointment, and the desire for understanding that characterized their interactions, noting how moments of attempted reconciliation were repeatedly undermined by defensiveness, passive aggression, and subtle provocations, creating an environment where emotional equilibrium was fragile, and every interaction felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm of unresolved tension, fear, and lingering doubt, while also highlighting the courage required to continue engaging, communicating, and attempting connection despite the risk of further hurt. Rasheeda described how family dynamics had become increasingly strained, with members taking sides, whispering behind doors, and using past grievances to manipulate outcomes and provoke reactions, leaving her to navigate an ever-shifting landscape of alliances and oppositions, where trust had become a scarce commodity and discernment was paramount. And she recounted specific instances where casual remarks were weaponized, gestures misinterpreted, and interactions carefully orchestrated to test her patience, composure, and emotional resilience, making even seemingly mundane events a battlefield of psychological strategy and subtle manipulation, forcing her to cultivate a heightened sense of awareness, emotional intelligence, and strategic thinking. And she reflected on how this constant vigilance had both taxed her mental health and sharpened her capacity for reading people, anticipating potential provocations, and responding in ways that preserved dignity, agency, and the potential for eventual resolution. The social media aftermath compounded the challenge, as fans, commentators, and casual observers dissected every interaction, every facial expression, and every statement, generating a feedback loop of speculation, rumor, and judgment that intensified the emotional pressure and magnified the stakes of every action, leaving Rasheeda acutely aware of the duality between public perception and private reality. And she detailed the delicate balance required to maintain authenticity while managing impressions, correcting misinformation, and asserting narrative control in a landscape where visibility was unavoidable and scrutiny relentless. And she described the strategic choices she made regarding what to share, when to engage, and how to protect her emotional well-being in the face of an audience that often blurred the line between concern, curiosity, and intrusion. therapy emerged as a vital tool in her recovery, providing a structured environment where she could process the accumulation of stress, betrayal, and emotional turbulence, and develop strategies for establishing boundaries, managing manipulative dynamics, and cultivating resilience. And she recounted how the therapeutic process illuminated patterns in her own reactions, the behaviors of those around her, and the structural dynamics that had enabled the manipulation to thrive, allowing her to approach subsequent interactions with clarity and a deeper understanding of both self and others, and to transform her experiences from sources of helplessness into opportunities for empowerment, insight, and personal growth. She spoke candidly about the importance of documenting her experiences through writing, recording events, emotions, and reflections as a method of validation, analysis, and empowerment, creating a tangible archive that allowed her to reclaim control over her narrative, counter distortions, and process the complex layers of emotion provoked by the vacation and its fallout. And she highlighted how this practice became both therapeutic and strategic, a means of asserting authority over her story while simultaneously providing a tool for reflection, learning, and preparation for future interactions, ensuring that her responses were guided by insight rather than reactivity. The discovery of hidden messages and covert recordings further underscored the level of orchestration behind the conflicts she had endured, revealing that moments of tension, confrontation, and emotional exposure had been intentionally provoked and amplified by those seeking to manipulate perceptions, create drama, and undermine trust. And she described the shock, indignation, and eventual resolve that emerged from these revelations, recognizing both the depth of deception she had faced and the necessity of cultivating discernment, strategic awareness, and protective boundaries in her relationships moving forward, as well as the importance of preserving her sense of self, autonomy, and emotional integrity in the midst of calculated interference. Rasheeda also detailed the challenges of navigating professional interactions in the wake of the publicized drama, noting that colleagues, collaborators, and associates often approached engagements with subtle caution, skepticism, or even curiosity, requiring her to maintain composure, project confidence, and manage impressions carefully, balancing authenticity with strategic presentation. And she emphasized how this dual navigation of personal and professional spheres demanded both emotional intelligence and resilience, as every interaction became a test of her ability to manage perception, maintain authority, and protect herself from potential exploitation or misinterpretation. Throughout her narrative, Rasheeda stressed the transformative potential of adversity, reflecting on how the vacation, though initially devastating, ultimately provided insight into relationships, loyalty, and personal resilience, revealing hidden strengths, clarifying values, and exposing relational dynamics that had previously been obscured, offering a stark but necessary lens through which to assess trust, boundaries, and priorities. And she described the gradual process of reclaiming narrative control, asserting agency, and cultivating emotional fortitude as empowering, enabling her to approach both family and social dynamics with strategic awareness, intentionality, and a renewed sense of self-determination, demonstrating that even amidst profound betrayal and public scrutiny, one can rebuild, assert authority over one's story, and navigate complex interpersonal landscapes with insight and resilience. She recounted the paradoxical nature of visibility, noting that while social media and public attention amplified stress and misrepresentation, they also provided an opportunity to assert narrative control, engage selectively, and cultivate a network of support, validation, and understanding, highlighting how moments of vulnerability shared publicly could reinforce empowerment, foster solidarity, and create connection with audiences who resonated with her experiences, offering both emotional sustenance and affirmation of her resilience, and underscoring the delicate balance between authenticity, privacy, and strategic engagement in a highly visible world. Rasheeda emphasized that the cumulative impact of prolonged emotional strain, scrutiny, and manipulation necessitated deliberate practices of self-care, reflection, and selective engagement, strategies she described as essential for preserving mental health, maintaining emotional stability, and fostering agency, resilience, and clarity, illustrating that navigating relational and public complexities requires ongoing attention, discernment, and the cultivation of internal resources that allow for sustained composure, strategic action, and emotional equilibrium, even amidst ongoing turbulence, criticism, or conflict, demonstrating the human capacity to recover, adapt, and thrive in the face of orchestrated adversity. Ultimately, Rasheeda's recounting of the vacation and its aftermath provided a comprehensive and unflinching exploration of betrayal, manipulation, emotional turbulence, and the interplay between private experiences and public visibility, illuminating both the challenges and the transformative potential inherent in navigating such complexities, and offering insight into the cultivation of resilience, discernment, and agency, while illustrating how one can reclaim narrative authority, establish boundaries, and rebuild trust within, even after profound disruption and emotional upheaval, serving as a testament to human endurance, insight, and the capacity for personal growth in the aftermath of deeply destabilizing experiences. And in sharing her story, she offered both catharsis and guidance, demonstrating that adversity, while painful and disorienting, can also be a catalyst for empowerment, clarity, and renewed self-determination. Rasheeda's life after the vacation became an intricate tapestry of emotional complexity, a relentless series of days filled with tension, betrayal, and a heightened awareness that every interaction, no matter how casual, could harbor hidden motives or subtle manipulations. And she described how the aftermath of those days left her navigating an environment where the familiar suddenly felt foreign, where gestures of goodwill were sometimes veiled with strategic intent, and where the simple act of speaking her mind could be interpreted as provocation, criticism, or challenge, creating a constant need for vigilance, careful consideration, and strategic thought, as she attempted to reconcile the world she had experienced during the trip with the one she now inhabited at home, where lingering shadows of conflict and mistrust seemed to hang over every conversation, every glance, and every decision, amplifying anxiety and testing resilience in ways she had never anticipated. She recounted the series of confrontations with Kirk, where attempts at clarity and communication repeatedly spiraled into defensiveness, tension, and unspoken accusations, moments where past grievances were dredged up, compounded, and weaponized in ways that left both of them emotionally raw, yet illuminated underlying patterns in their relationship that demanded awareness, reflection, and intentional action. And she described the painstaking effort required to navigate these interactions with both honesty and self-protection, balancing a desire for reconciliation with the necessity of establishing boundaries and safeguarding emotional well-being, all while maintaining composure in the face of escalating frustration and emotional volatility, realizing that even minor exchanges could escalate into full-blown disputes if not carefully managed. The broader family dynamics further complicated her experience. As allegiances shifted, subtle manipulations were deployed, and some members appeared to relish the ongoing turmoil, whether through whispered comments, or carefully timed interventions designed to provoke reactions, leaving Rasheeda to negotiate a constantly shifting landscape of alliances, oppositions, and hidden agendas. And she recounted specific moments where ordinary conversations were transformed into psychological minefields, where the stakes of every interaction were heightened by the knowledge that someone might be observing, judging, or manipulating behind the scenes, forcing her to cultivate an acute sense of perception, emotional intelligence, and strategic thinking, and to develop both verbal and nonverbal tactics for managing conflict without capitulating or exposing vulnerability unnecessarily. And she reflected on how this process, while exhausting, also enhanced her awareness, resilience, and ability to read complex social cues, turning survival into a skill as essential as it was draining. Social media added another layer of complexity, amplifying private conflicts into public spectacle, where every facial expression, word choice, or emotional reaction became fodder for speculation, gossip, and judgment, intensifying the pressure and the sense of exposure. And Rasheeda described how navigating this environment required a careful balancing act between transparency and discretion, asserting her narrative control while protecting herself from misrepresentation, and selectively engaging with fans, critics, and observers to maintain dignity and emotional stability, understanding that visibility could be both a weapon and a tool, depending on how she wielded it, and learning to filter external noise while focusing on authenticity and integrity in her responses, which became an essential part of her ongoing emotional management. Therapy emerged as a cornerstone in her process of recovery, providing a structured and safe space to untangle the myriad of emotions, to explore patterns of manipulation and betrayal, and to develop strategies for emotional resilience, boundary setting, and discernment. And she recounted how repeated reflection with a professional helped her understand not only the behavior of others but also her own reactions, vulnerabilities, and areas for growth, equipping her with tools to navigate future interactions with intentionality, composure, and insight. transforming her experience from a source of helplessness into an opportunity for empowerment and personal development, and highlighting the importance of professional support in situations of sustained relational and emotional complexity. Rasheeda emphasized the significance of documenting her experiences through writing, a practice that allowed her to process emotions, validate her lived reality, and create a tangible record that could counter distortions or manipulations by others, enabling her to assert control over her narrative and gain clarity in the midst of confusion. And she described how journaling and reflective writing became both therapeutic and strategic, offering a means to articulate thoughts, plan responses, and develop a cohesive understanding of events and interpersonal dynamics. Reinforcing her sense of agency and self-determination, the uncovering of hidden messages, recordings, and covert communications further revealed the depth of orchestration behind the vacation conflicts, demonstrating that what appeared spontaneous had often been carefully designed to provoke emotional reactions, manipulate perceptions, and destabilize her. And Rasheeda recounted the mixture of shock, indignation, and eventual resolve that emerged from these discoveries, recognizing the necessity of discernment, strategic thinking, and protective boundaries in managing her interactions moving forward. And the awareness of being deliberately targeted by manipulation underscored the importance of emotional intelligence and vigilance in her ongoing navigation of both familial and social landscapes. Professional and social environments added additional layers of challenge, as colleagues, collaborators, and acquaintances who were aware of the publicized drama often approached her with subtle caution, skepticism, or curiosity, compelling her to maintain composure, project confidence, and strategically manage perceptions, balancing authenticity with careful self-presentation. And she highlighted how the dual demands of navigating personal and public spheres under scrutiny required a heightened sense of self-awareness, deliberate engagement, and resilience, transforming every interaction into both a test and an opportunity for demonstrating strength, insight, and emotional control. Throughout her narrative, Rasheeda stressed that while the vacation had been a source of disruption and emotional distress, it had also revealed latent strengths, clarified values, and exposed relational dynamics that had previously gone unnoticed, offering an opportunity for reflection, personal growth, and strategic recalibration of trust, boundaries, and priorities. And she described the gradual process of reclaiming narrative control, asserting agency, and cultivating emotional fortitude as empowering, allowing her to approach subsequent interactions with strategic awareness, intentionality, and a renewed sense of self-determination, demonstrating that even amidst betrayal and public scrutiny, it is possible to rebuild, assert authority, and navigate complex interpersonal landscapes with insight and resilience. She reflected on the paradox of visibility in a social media-driven world, where private turmoil is amplified and analyzed but also offers avenues for connection, solidarity, and narrative control. And she recounted how moments of vulnerability shared with trusted audiences reinforced her sense of agency, provided validation, and fostered emotional sustenance, illustrating the dual nature of public exposure as both challenge and opportunity, requiring strategic engagement, selective transparency, and the cultivation of supportive networks to buffer against manipulation, judgment, or misinterpretation. Rasheeda highlighted that prolonged exposure to relational tension, scrutiny, and manipulation necessitated deliberate self-care, reflective practices, and selective engagement strategies to preserve mental health, maintain emotional equilibrium, and foster resilience, underscoring the human capacity to develop coping mechanisms, cultivate insight, and assert agency amidst ongoing adversity, demonstrating that sustained composure, strategic response, and emotional intelligence are essential for navigating the intricate interplay of private relationships and public visibility. Ultimately, her recounting offered an unflinching exploration of betrayal, manipulation, and the complex interplay between private experiences and public perception, illuminating the challenges, insights, and transformative potential inherent in navigating such circumstances, and providing guidance on cultivating resilience, boundaries, and narrative authority, while showing that even in the aftermath of profound disruption and emotional upheaval, one can rebuild, reclaim agency, and emerge with clarity, strength, and a renewed commitment to authentic relational engagement and self-determination. So now, after hearing Rasheeda's story, the raw truth of the vacation that shook her world, you might be asking yourself, what would you do if you were in her shoes, facing manipulation, betrayal, and emotional turbulence from the people you trusted most? People you thought were allies but who turned the moments meant for joy into a crucible of conflict. And as you reflect on that, Think about the way her experience unfolded, how each confrontation, each whispered rumor, each strategically timed comment contributed to a storm that left her questioning everything. And yet, through it all, Rasheeda emerged with clarity, insight, and resilience, showing that even in the darkest, most chaotic moments, there is a way to reclaim your voice, assert your boundaries, and navigate a world that often seems determined to test you at every turn. And this is why it's so important for you to engage, because her story isn't just entertainment, it's a mirror, a lesson, and a warning wrapped into one, a chance to witness human strength, vulnerability, and the messy complexity of relationships unfold before your eyes. Now, take a moment to think about how you interact with your own circle of family and friends, the alliances you've built, the conflicts you've brushed aside or ignored, and consider what you would do differently if you knew, like Rasheeda, that every word, every glance, every decision could have deeper implications, because the reality is, life throws challenges at us in unpredictable ways, and observing how someone else navigates these storms can provide insight, perspective, and even strategies for handling your own personal battles. And that's why this story matters. It's not just drama. It's a blueprint for understanding human behavior, emotional resilience, and the ways in which we can protect ourselves while maintaining dignity and integrity even when the world seems determined to shake our foundations. As you watch Rasheeda recount the highs, the lows, the betrayals, the confrontations, the moments of doubt and heartbreak, it's impossible not to feel the tension, the suspense, and the emotional weight of every revelation. And that's exactly the point. These stories engage us, challenge us, and invite us to reflect on our own lives, our own relationships, and the ways in which we respond when faced with manipulation, conflict, or emotional upheaval. And by sharing your thoughts, your reactions, and your opinions in the comments below, you become part of the conversation, part of the reflection, part of a community that's processing, reacting, and learning together from the story Rasheeda has bravely shared. So hit that like button if Rasheeda's story shocked you, if it made you pause and think about the complexities of family, trust, and betrayal. Because every click is more than engagement, it's validation, it's acknowledgement. It's a way of saying that you've witnessed the courage it takes to confront manipulation, navigate conflict, and emerge with insight and strength. And it shows your support for content that doesn't shy away from difficult truths, but instead dives headfirst into them, revealing the raw, unfiltered reality of human relationships and emotional resilience. Don't forget to subscribe, because this channel isn't just about watching drama unfold, it's about staying connected, staying informed, and staying part of a space where real stories, raw emotions, and personal growth converge, where you can witness the way people handle adversity, betrayal, and challenge, and learn from the ways they navigate those turbulent waters, providing inspiration, perspective, and sometimes even a roadmap for handling your own challenges in life, relationships, or personal growth. And by subscribing, you ensure that you never miss an update, a revelation, or a continuation of stories like Rasheeda's stories that pull back the curtain and show you the human experience in all its messy, complex, and often heartbreaking glory. And while you're here, take a moment to comment, because your opinion matters, your perspective matters, and your engagement contributes to a dialogue that helps us all process, reflect, and understand. Whether you're shocked by what Rasheeda revealed, inspired by her resilience, or simply intrigued by the twists and turns of the story, sharing your thoughts allows you to be part of a larger conversation, a community that witnesses, reacts, and learns together. And there's power in that shared experience, in knowing that you're not just a viewer, you're part of a collective reflection on human behavior, trust, and emotional endurance. So write down your reactions, your thoughts, the moments that surprised you, or the points where you felt a personal connection to Rasheeda's journey, because engagement isn't just numbers, it's a way of participating, of validating, and of showing that her story, and stories like hers, resonate, impact, and provoke thought. And as you do that, think about the lessons embedded in the narrative, the importance of boundaries, the necessity of discernment, the courage it takes to confront betrayal, and the resilience required to navigate conflict without losing yourself. Because these lessons are universal, applicable in your own life, and seeing them in action through Rasheeda's experience makes them tangible, real, and memorable, creating a framework for reflection and growth. And finally, remember that by liking, subscribing, and commenting, you're not just engaging with entertainment or actively participating in a space that explores human complexity, emotional turbulence, and personal growth in a way that's immersive, insightful, and emotionally resonant. And your engagement ensures that stories like Rasheeda's continue to be shared, discussed, and reflected upon, keeping the conversation alive, the lessons relevant, and the community connected. So take action now. Express your thoughts, and stay part of the journey. Because every interaction strengthens the dialogue, honors the courage it takes to share these stories, and reminds us all that human resilience, insight, and growth are worth witnessing, acknowledging, and celebrating.